We'd been documenting abandoned mental institutions for nearly a year before we came across the one in upstate New York. It was called St. Ives Psychiatric Hospital, shut down since the late 80s. No big scandal, no infamous escapee or tortured patients like the places we usually sought out. Just quietly closed and left to rot. Ben found it while combing through a forgotten blog post on a historical exploration site. It wasn't marked on any of the Urban Explorer maps, and the only photos online were decades old. That made it all the more tempting. Untouched, unknown, unexplored. The facility sat deep in the woods, 10 miles past a town so small we didn't even get cell service. The driveway was long overgrown, nearly invisible from the road, and the buildings were hidden behind a thick wall of pines. We left the car parked behind a row of trees and hiked the last half-mile in. St. Ives was a campus of 6 buildings, all cracked and crumbling, eaten alive by vines and rust. The main hospital building was the largest, 4 stories high, its windows shattered or boarded. But we were drawn to Building 6 almost immediately. It was smaller, more isolated, and weirdly intact. All the doors were sealed. Every window was reinforced with metal bars. At first, we thought it had been converted to a storage wing or something more secure. But the door to the main hospital had been left ajar. We figured we'd start there. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and old paper. Peeling wallpaper hung like dead skin, and moss crept along the floor tiles. Ben started filming while I swept the flashlight beam across rusted beds and wheelchairs frozen mid-motion. Empty fourth stands cast strange shadows across the walls. We passed old nurses' stations, day rooms, solitary cells, the usual. And then we found the file room. Cabinets toppled over one another, their contents spilled across the floor. Medical reports, patient logs, and faded black and white photos. We took a few with us to show on the video later. As we moved to the second floor, I noticed something strange. Most of the doors to the patient rooms were ajar or broken off entirely, except one, room 217. The door was intact, the handle shiny like it had been polished, and bolted shut from the outside. Ben paused, nudging the door with his boot. "Someone didn't want this thing open," he muttered. There was something about the way the hallway light hit that door. It just felt wrong, like it didn't belong to the rest of the building. I didn't want to be near it, and Ben, usually the one pushing forward, didn't press it either. We moved on. By the time we reached Building 6, the sun was already starting to set. The air had grown colder, and a thin mist crept in from the trees. We circled the structure looking for a way in, and found a boarded window with enough give for us to pry it loose. Inside, the silence was immediate. Thick. It swallowed every sound we made. No birds outside, no wind. Just the echo of our own breathing and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor. This building was different. Cleaner, more intact. No graffiti, no broken glass. As if no one had touched it in decades. I felt like we had crossed into a space we shouldn't be in. We walked through narrow corridors, lit only by our flashlights. The walls were lined with old patient doors, thicker, reinforced, each with a tiny sliding window at eye level. One after another, they were all closed. Ben tried a few, but they didn't budge. Then we heard the first sound, a faint knock. Not from us, not from the wind, just knock, knock, knock. We froze. The sound came again. From one of the rooms ahead of us. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. Ben turned the camera toward it, whispering under his breath, "You getting this?" I nodded, swallowing hard. I wanted to leave, but my feet stayed rooted to the floor. We approached the door slowly. It was labeled Room 3 in faded paint. The knock had stopped, but the tension hadn't. Ben reached out and slid open the eye-level panel. He jerked back immediately. "What?" I whispered, panicked. He didn't answer, just kept staring into the dark slit. I stepped closer and peeked inside. At first, I didn't see anything. Just a bare cot, stained floor tiles, and then movement. Something in the corner. A figure crouched low with its back turned to us. It looked human, but wrong. Too thin. Arms too long. Then it moved. Slowly, its head turning toward the door, eyes glowing faintly in the beam of our flashlight. Ben slammed the panel shut and stepped back, breath quickening. "I think we need to go," he said. I didn't argue. As we turned to leave, every door in the corridor slammed shut at once, a thunderous bang that shook the walls. We broke into a run, flashlight beams bouncing wildly, but the way back wasn't the same. The corridors twisted, seemed longer than before. We hit dead ends where there hadn't been any earlier. Panic started to set in, and then came the voice, a soft, childlike whisper behind us. "Come back." We didn't turn around. We pushed through a rusted door and found ourselves in a stairwell we hadn't seen before. We didn't care. We took it, bolting up 2 flights before slamming into another door that led us, somehow, outside. We stumbled into the woods, lungs burning, hearts pounding. We didn't stop until we reached the car. Neither of us spoke the whole drive home. Later that night, we reviewed the footage. Most of it was fine until we got to the hallway in Building 6. The video distorted, audio warping into static. And then, in one frame, just for a second, we saw the thing from room 3 standing right behind us in the hallway. Closer than we'd realized, we never uploaded that video. We tried to forget about St. Ives, but sometimes I hear knocking at night, always in sets of 3. And when I look through the peephole on my front door, there's nothing there. Just silence, waiting. I used to live in a small town outside of Reno, Nevada. Not the kind of place you'd expect something strange or dangerous to happen. It was quiet. Mostly retirees, a few college kids renting cheap homes, and people like me, just trying to get by. I worked the night shift at a distribution center, so my days were flipped. I'd come home just after sunrise and sleep until evening. One morning, after finishing a rough shift, I pulled into my driveway and noticed something odd. My front door was slightly ajar. I lived alone, and I was always careful about locking up. At first, I thought maybe I hadn't pulled it shut properly. I walked in slowly, heart picking up speed, but nothing seemed out of place. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing. I checked the windows, the back door. Everything else was locked. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion messing with me. Maybe I hadn't closed it all the way after rushing out for work. I shut the door, locked it, and went to bed. That was the first day. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps above me. My bedroom was in the basement, and the upper level was empty, or at least it was supposed to be. I froze, holding my breath. The steps were slow, deliberate. Not like someone moving furniture, more like someone pacing. I quietly reached for the baseball bat I kept under my bed and crept up the stairs. By the time I opened the basement door and stepped into the living room, the noise had stopped. I turned on all the lights and checked every room. Nothing. No one. I even opened all the closets. Still nothing. But I felt it. That lingering sensation, like the room still held someone else's breath. I didn't sleep much that day. The next few weeks, more little things started happening. My keys weren't where I left them. The cabinet under the sink was open when I was sure I'd closed it. A spoon in the sink I hadn't used. Nothing big enough to prove anything, but just enough to keep me on edge. One afternoon, I was in the middle of getting ready for work when I heard a knock at the door. It was a woman I'd never seen before, maybe late 30s, with dark circles under her eyes and a look of quiet desperation. She asked if I had lived there long. I said about 8 months. Then she asked if I'd noticed anything strange, unusual noises, objects moving. I hesitated but nodded. She introduced herself as Monica, said she used to live in the house a year ago with her younger brother. They had to move out suddenly. When I asked why, her eyes shifted like she was deciding how much to tell me. "There's something wrong with this house," she said. "It keeps things." I asked her what that meant, but she just shook her head and backed away. Told me to trust my instincts, and if I ever started feeling afraid for no clear reason, I needed to get out. I didn't know what to make of her. Maybe she was unwell, but I couldn't shake the way she said it, like she wasn't warning me about a ghost, but something else. That night at work, I kept turning her words over in my mind. When I got home the next morning, I found something waiting on my kitchen table, a Polaroid photo. It showed a man I didn't recognize sitting on my living room couch. Not recent either. It looked dated, like something from the 90s. The wallpaper in the background wasn't even the same as mine, but the layout was unmistakably this house. I had never owned a Polaroid camera. I searched every drawer and cabinet looking for the source, thinking maybe someone had broken in again. But the locks were untouched. The next day, another photo. This one of Monica, much younger, maybe early 20s, standing in the backyard. Same style, same faded edges. It was placed on my pillow when I woke up. My bedroom door had been locked. I called the police that time. They looked around, asked questions, but there was nothing concrete to report. No forced entry, no signs of trespassing, just some old photographs. They took them for evidence, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. A few days later, things escalated. I had just laid down after work, trying to get some sleep, when I heard whispering. Not outside, inside, in the vents. It was faint, but I could make out something that sounded like my name. I climbed out of bed, heart thudding, and pressed my ear to the air duct near the ceiling. The voice stopped the moment I touched it. Then the room went ice cold. I didn't sleep at all that day. I went to a motel that night and stayed there for 2 more. When I came back to grab more clothes, I found a small envelope taped to my bedroom mirror. Inside was another Polaroid. This one was of me, asleep, in bed, taken from inside the room. I felt sick, violated. I packed everything I could and left that night, drove to a friend's place in Sacramento, didn't even tell my boss. I needed to be somewhere with other people, somewhere I could breathe. But the story doesn't end there. About a month later, Monica called me. I hadn't given her my number. She said she got it from the police report. I didn't even ask how. She sounded frantic, scared out of her mind. Told me she found something I needed to see. She sent me an email with an attachment. A scanned letter from the late 70s, addressed to a Mr. Harlan from a woman named Deborah Leaks. The letter talked about the house I had been living in, detailing strange behavior from her husband after moving in, how he'd started acting paranoid, hearing things, seeing people in photographs that weren't supposed to be there. She begged this Mr. Harlan to come take the thing back, said she knew it had come from him, that he'd lied about it being destroyed. There was no explanation about what it was, just a final sentence that read, "It mimics presence. It learns your routine. It watches until it's ready." I asked Monica where she found it. She said the attic. Thing is, my house didn't have an attic, at least not one with a visible entrance. She told me she'd found a small covered hatch beneath old insulation in the ceiling corner of what used to be her brother's room. When she opened it, there were dozens of photographs, all Polaroids, some of her, some of me, some of people she didn't recognize at all, and one of a man standing just inside the attic, holding a camera, face obscured by shadow. I didn't want to know any more. I thanked her and told her I was staying far away from that place. I wanted no part in figuring it out, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop checking my surroundings, looking over my shoulder, feeling like eyes were on me. Sometimes at night, even in Sacramento, I'd hear soft clicking sounds, like a camera shutter, in the dark. No source, no camera, just the sound. I've moved again since then. Changed jobs, got a roommate, tried to stay surrounded by people, but even now, sometimes when I wake up, I'll find something moved. A chair slightly out of place. A closet door open that I swear was shut. I don't take pictures anymore, and I never ever look through old ones, because I'm terrified of who, or what, might be standing in the background. My older cousin Sana told me this story a few years ago, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. It happened to her back in 2006 when she was 21. She was working as a receptionist at a small pathology clinic in a quiet residential neighborhood in Lahore. The clinic wasn't a big one, just a narrow building tucked between a bakery and a stationery store. It had 2 doctors who came in during the day and a lab technician who worked in the back. Sana mostly worked the evening shift alone, from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. The area was usually bustling during the day, but by dusk the streets would empty out. Most businesses closed by 7, and after that, it would feel strangely deserted. One evening in late August, as Sana was locking up the front desk to go home, a man appeared at the clinic door. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, wearing a dull brown button-up shirt and dress pants that were a little too big for him. His hair was slicked back and he wore thin-framed glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He seemed harmless. He even smiled politely and asked in an overly formal tone if the lab technician was still there. Sana told him the lab closed at 7 and she was about to lock up. The man nodded but didn't leave. Instead, he started asking odd questions. If she lived nearby, if the clinic had night hours, and if she was studying medicine. His tone wasn't threatening, just overly curious. But something about the way he stood too close to the glass door made her uncomfortable. Before she could politely end the conversation, he said, "You're very professional for someone so young. I run a pharmaceutical supply business. We could use someone like you, well-spoken, neat, respectful. You'd earn more than you do here." Sana smiled politely and said she wasn't looking to change jobs. But the man pressed on. He said his office was just around the corner in a house that had been converted into a business unit. He said she didn't have to decide right away, just drop by the next day so they could talk. Before she could decline again, he handed her a visiting card. It had a business name printed on it and a landline number. She didn't want to be rude, so she took it and nodded, but made up her mind to throw it away later. That night, Sana couldn't sleep well. She told herself she was overthinking things. Maybe the man really was just a harmless businessman. But the next day, he showed up again, this time around 6:30 p.m., when it was already getting dark. He greeted her like they were old friends and asked if she had considered his offer. Sana was firm and told him she wasn't interested, but the man wasn't deterred. He said, "Just 5 minutes. Come after your shift. I'll walk you to the place myself." Sana didn't want to argue, and frankly, she felt awkward turning him down a second time. She figured she'd go, hear him out, and leave. She even texted her friend Nida about it and shared the address from the business card, just in case. At 9:05 p.m., after closing the clinic, she saw him waiting by the corner, exactly as he said. He greeted her warmly and started leading her down a side street. It wasn't a part of the neighborhood she usually walked in, but it didn't look shady either. He pointed at a white double-story house with a rusted gate. "That's my place," he said. They entered a small compound with a mango tree in one corner and a bunch of old chairs stacked near the door. The lights inside the house were dim, and the air felt oddly still. He opened the door and gestured for her to go in first. The moment Sina stepped inside, a strange chill ran down her back. The air smelled faintly of mothballs and something metallic, like rusted iron. The house didn't look like an office at all. There was a couch pushed against one wall, a dusty bookshelf, and a tea table with old newspapers stacked on it. A pedestal fan stood in the corner, whirring loudly but barely moving any air. The man walked in behind her and shut the door. Something about the sound of the latch clicking shut made her stomach twist. She turned and asked, "So where's your office set up?" He smiled and said, "Oh, it's just upstairs. I keep the files and everything there." Sana hesitated. "Is anyone else here?" "My niece is upstairs. She's in college too, actually," he replied. "She can tell you how we operate. You'll feel more comfortable hearing it from another girl." Still uneasy, Sana followed him up a narrow staircase. Each step creaked, and the hallway upstairs was barely lit by a single flickering bulb. He pointed to the door at the end and said, "She's inside." He knocked on the door and opened it, motioning for Sana to go in. But as she stepped forward, she noticed the room was completely dark. No sound, no light, nothing. She froze. "Is she asleep?" Sana asked cautiously. Before he could answer, a loud banging came from another room down the hall. 3 sharp knocks, then silence. The man turned pale and muttered, "Ignore that." "It's probably the cat." But Sana had heard no meowing, just the sound of something heavy moving behind that door. She felt her heart racing. "I think I should go," she said. He stepped in front of her. "Don't be silly, just 5 minutes." She tried to step around him, but he blocked her path. His tone changed. He wasn't smiling anymore. "You should at least hear the offer. It's rude to leave halfway." Sana felt panic rising. She glanced at the staircase and made a split-second decision. "I left my phone downstairs," she lied. "Let me grab it." The man paused, then nodded slowly. "All right, but come right back up." As soon as she reached the ground floor, she ran. She yanked the front door open and sprinted out of the gate without looking back. She didn't stop until she reached the main road where a few auto rickshaws were parked. She jumped into one and told the driver to go, anywhere, just away from that street. That night, she deleted the man's number and blocked the clinic's landline so he couldn't call again. She didn't even go to work the next day. Instead, she asked her cousin to accompany her to the clinic a few days later so she could formally resign. The owner understood, especially when she told him what had happened. A week later, Nida showed her a news report. A man had been arrested in a different part of the city. He had lured young women to his home under the pretense of job interviews. Authorities found hidden cameras, sedatives, and dozens of fake business cards in his home. When Sana saw the photo, she felt sick. It was the same man. She realized then how lucky she had been to get out when she did. She still has nightmares about the locked door, the dark room, and those loud knocks from the other side. And to this day, she never answers unknown numbers or agrees to job offers without a thorough background check. She says she learned the hard way that sometimes even the most polite smile can hide something dangerous, something predatory, something waiting in the dark. I haven't spoken about this in years. Honestly, I'd almost convinced myself it didn't happen. But last week, while cleaning out some of my late brother's things, I found an old drawing tucked into one of his sketchbooks. A pencil sketch, rough and smudged, but unmistakably familiar. It was of the tiny door under the stairs, just like we remembered it. That's what brought all of this rushing back. I was 13 when my dad got custody of us. My older brother, Daniel, was 16. We'd spent most of our lives with our mom in upstate New York, but after her health started to decline, It was decided we'd move in with our father in rural Vermont. He lived in an old farmhouse that had belonged to his grandparents, a creaky, drafty place on the edge of dense woods, about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town. The house had a long gravel driveway, a collapsed barn in the back, and a cold, musty feel that hit you the second you walked through the door. The ceilings were low, the floorboards groaned with every step, and there were places where the wallpaper had peeled off in curling sheets. Still, it was huge compared to our old apartment, and Dad had worked hard to make it livable. He'd fixed the plumbing, replaced windows, even painted the upstairs bedrooms for us. But something about that house always felt off, not in an obviously haunted way, just a quiet, underlying wrongness, like walking into a room where someone had just been talking about you. Daniel and I were close, especially during those years. We didn't know anyone in town, and school was rough at first. So we spent most of our time together, exploring the woods, playing old video games, or just talking in his room late into the night. One of the first things we noticed about the house was the small door built into the wall beneath the staircase. It looked like a cupboard or crawl space, barely 3 feet high and painted the same color as the wall. There was no handle, just a little keyhole and a faint seam around the edge. Dad told us it was sealed shut, left over from an old coal chute or something, and not to worry about it. But that door was right across from our shared bathroom, and every night we passed it on the way to bed. For a while, it was just a weird quirk, a piece of the house's strange personality. But about 2 months after we moved in, things started to change. It began with the knocking. It wasn't loud, barely a tap, tap, tap. But it came from inside the wall, right around the base of the staircase. Sometimes we'd hear it while brushing our teeth at night. Other times, it would start just as we were settling into bed. The first few times, we brushed it off. Old houses make noises, mice, plumbing, wind. That's what we told ourselves, but then the knocking started getting more persistent and rhythmic. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, like someone trying to get our attention. One night I was walking to the bathroom and heard something else, a soft scraping like fingernails dragging along wood. I stood frozen in the hallway, eyes locked on that little door. The noise stopped as soon as I stepped closer. I told Daniel the next morning, and to my relief, he didn't laugh. In fact, he looked pale. "I heard it too," he said. "Last night. I thought you were messing with me." We told Dad, but he brushed it off. "Old house settling," he muttered, barely looking up from his coffee. "You kids have been watching too many scary movies." After that, we decided to ignore it, or try to. But as the weeks went on, the activity escalated. Sometimes we'd find small things out of place in the morning. A cereal box on the counter instead of in the cabinet. A bathroom drawer left wide open. The television turned to static in the middle of the night. One evening, Daniel and I came home from school to find muddy footprints on the stairs. Small prints. Too small for Dad's boots. Too narrow for either of us. They started just inside the front door and ended at the top of the stairs, right outside Daniel's room. That night, we pushed the dresser in front of his bedroom door. A few days later, we noticed the keyhole on the little door had been scratched. The paint around it was chipped, and there were tiny splinters on the floor, like someone had been picking at it with something sharp. I remember kneeling down to look at it and feeling this wave of nausea, like my stomach turned inside out. I touched the wood and it felt cold, unnaturally cold. Daniel grew quiet after that. He stopped talking as much, stopped eating dinner with us. He spent hours in his room with the door locked, sketching in his notebook. When I asked him what he was drawing, he just shook his head. A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone whispering my name. Not loud, just a breathy, drawn-out Emily. I thought it was Daniel at first, but when I got up and cracked open my door, the hallway was empty. His room was dark, and the little door under the stairs was open. Just an inch, but definitely open. I remember backing away, heart pounding, and running to Daniel's room. I knocked, then pushed the door open. He hadn't locked it that night. He was sitting up in bed, staring at the wall, pale and soaked in sweat. He didn't even look at me. "I saw it," he whispered. I asked what he meant, but he wouldn't answer. I sat with him the rest of the night, both of us too afraid to go back into the hallway. He never told me exactly what he saw, but later I found a drawing tucked under his pillow. A black figure, crouched low and twisted, barely fitting inside the outline of that little door. The next morning, we begged Dad to do something, anything. He finally agreed to seal the door shut, for real this time. He used heavy nails and a metal plate, and even placed an old dresser in front of it. "There," he said. "Happy?" That night, the house was completely quiet. The next night, too. For a while, things seemed better. Daniel even started to act like himself again. We played board games, ate dinner as a family. I began to hope maybe whatever had happened was over. Then came the scratching. It was faint at first, like a rat in the walls. But it came from behind the dresser, from behind the sealed door. Daniel and I didn't even say anything to each other the first time we heard it. We just sat on the couch, eyes fixed on the stairs, listening. The scratching came every night after that. And then the whispering returned, but it wasn't just saying my name anymore. It said Daniel's too, over and over, whispered in different voices, some soft and pleading, others angry and harsh. We stopped sleeping, stopped going near the stairs after dark. I even started bringing a flashlight with me to the bathroom. The last night we spent in that house, I woke up to Daniel screaming. I ran to his room and found him on the floor, curled up and crying, his pillow soaked in blood. His nose had started bleeding in his sleep, and he'd had some kind of night terror. He kept saying, "It came out. It came out," over and over. I helped him up, and we stayed in the living room until sunrise, lights on, huddled under a blanket. That morning, we packed our bags and called our mom's sister to pick us up. Dad was furious, but he didn't stop us. We never went back. Years later, Daniel moved into a small apartment in Burlington. He never married, never talked much about the past, but he kept drawing. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of his sketchbooks when I visited. Always the same thing. That narrow little door, that hunched figure, its eyes just circles of black. He passed away 6 months ago, quietly, in his sleep. Heart condition. Or so they said. When I found that drawing in his notebook last week, the same door, the same figure, but this time with a long, thin hand reaching through the keyhole, I finally decided to write this all down, not to get closure, just to remember. Because Daniel never really escaped that house, and if I'm being honest, neither have I. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I still hear it, scratching, just beneath the floorboards, waiting. I was never supposed to live in that house. My name is Jordan. I'm 34, divorced, and I work for a small-town bank in Montana. I'm not the type of person people think of when they imagine anything scary happening to them. I pay my bills, I keep to myself, and up until 2 years ago, my idea of danger was getting a flat tire on the way to work. Then I bought the house. It was a foreclosure, classic fixer-upper. 2-story Victorian from the 1920s, pale green with white trim, tucked behind some trees on the edge of town. The kind of house that would have cost a fortune in a bigger city. But I got it for $72,000. The listing agent told me the previous owners walked away from it mid-renovation. Said it had great bones, just needed someone with a vision. Looking back, I should have noticed the red flags. The basement door padlocked from the outside, the cellar refusing to do a final walkthrough with me. The town clerk giving me a weird look when I filed the paperwork, but I just figured it was an old house. Old houses are weird. The first few weeks were fine. I slept on a mattress on the floor upstairs, tore out some drywall, started replacing the rotted porch steps. Nothing major. The place had character, high ceilings, arched doorways, original hardwoods under all the dust. I was even starting to enjoy the quiet. That was a mistake. It started one night around 2 a.m. I woke up suddenly, not from a noise, but from the absence of one. The crickets outside had gone silent. No wind, no cars in the distance. It was like the world had paused. Then I heard it. A creaking noise from downstairs. Slow, deliberate, like floorboards shifting under someone's weight. I froze. The kind of frozen where your brain is screaming, but your body won't move. I hadn't installed any of the security cameras yet. The front door was still unlocked. My heart thudded in my chest as I strained to listen. The creaking stopped. Then came a new sound, faint, scraping, like metal on concrete, from the direction of the basement. I told myself it was just the house settling, maybe a mouse, old pipes, anything but what it felt like. Someone down there dragging something heavy across the floor. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked the basement, or tried to. The padlock on the outside was still there, locked tight. I opened it, stepped down a few stairs, and stopped. The air down there felt wrong. Heavier, almost like standing in a cave. It smelled damp, metallic, and something else I couldn't place, like sour milk and rust. I flipped the light switch. Nothing. I turned on my phone flashlight and went down the remaining steps. The basement was unfinished, just a concrete floor and stone foundation walls, some broken furniture, an old water heater. Nothing that explained the sounds, except one thing. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a pile of scrap wood, was a square section of the floor that looked newer than the rest. A rough patch job. The concrete was a different color, smoother, like it had been poured recently. No dust, no cracks, no staining. I knelt down. It sounded hollow when I tapped it. I left it alone. That night I heard the scraping again. Every night after that, around 2 or 3 a.m., it would start, creaking floorboards, then that dragging sound from the basement. I'd sit in bed, heart pounding, clutching the crowbar I kept next to me. But every morning I'd check and find nothing disturbed, except the concrete patch started to change. First it cracked, just a hairline fracture. Then a few days later, the center bowed upward slightly, like something was pushing from beneath it. I called a contractor to come take a look. He showed up that Saturday. A guy named Rick, early 50s, big arms, no-nonsense attitude. I explained the issue and led him downstairs. He stepped onto the patch section, frowned, and asked, "Who poured this?" I told him it was there when I bought the house. He crouched down, ran his hand across the crack, and said, "This isn't right. Whoever did this didn't reinforce it, and there's moisture coming up from underneath." He grabbed a sledgehammer from his truck. I stood on the stairs while he started breaking it apart. 3 swings in, the crack split wide open, and something spilled out. Not water.